Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger, and it is our special Friday. Every Friday during the season, we get to speak to Mike Sando of The Athletic. And Mike, I got to admit, man, I had hoped that we'd be talking to you about a surprising and encouraging turn of events for the Seahawks. Instead, we welcome you back after what has been what I'm calling a recurring nightmare for Seahawks fans of another loss to San Francisco. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, it was you're not surprised that they lost the game, but I think you don't, when you're down 20 points in the first half. I mean, that to me, that's the biggest indictment or problem, right? I mean, you can rally and make it close and take something away from that, but that's a tough spot to be in.
It is. It is. Mike, I thought that the worst thing that was going to happen in the last 24 hours was going to be the Seahawks losing to the 49ers. It turns out that there was something worse. I woke up at 4 this morning to write my column, and then at 6 got my son up for school, got him ready for school, started putting his socks and shoes on, thinking that waking up early, I was going to be able to get some sleep later today when he was at school. And he says, "There's no school today." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" And I look online, and he's right. There's no school today. So, man, that was
So
worse.
you get no sleep right now, and
No.
I tell you, that's one thing. I used to travel a lot for games every weekend, and now I don't. With the structure of my column, we've talked about that before, and that's no joke. I know you weren't traveling back from the game, but those night games, and you're there way early. You're putting a lot of energy in, and then you're going to write. And you probably, like you said, you got up at 4 this morning. So yeah, I know that feeling very well. And now on to Atlanta, right? You're going to have a long trip for this next week too. So that's a little bit of the grind for still a fantasy job. I mean,
It
it's
is.
it's not a real grind, but sleep for anybody, a couple hours sleep doesn't really do it. So
Yes, it was definitely a morale hit. So getting back to this game, though, it's interesting, Mike. If you had zoomed out and you'd said, okay, the Seahawks are going to play the Detroit Lions in Detroit on Monday Night Football, and they're going to play the 49ers at home on short rest, you would expect, I think anybody would expect that the Seahawks were going to lose both of those games.
sure.
Vegas would have expect, odds makers would expect that. Any rational fan would expect that. But it feels somehow much worse having
Yeah.
gone through it. So, what do you make of what you've seen?
Well, you forgot to mention the whole reason it feels so much worse is the Giant game. That
Hmm.
they play the Giants without Malik Neighbors, without Singletary. They're their top two, skill players on offense, and then they have other guys go over 100 yards in those positions. So it's that helpless feeling on defense. You alluded to it in your column. I looked at it. I can remember, uh, my first year covering the team was 1998, and they finished at Denver, and Terrell Davis had 200 yards rushing. It just felt inevitable. It's just like, oh my gosh, you got no chance to win the game. So I think what we're seeing is a new head coach who was brought in mostly because they really wanted to upgrade their scheming. I mean, ideally, you would have had Mike McDonald with Pete Carroll as the leader, right? But Mike McDonald be scheming the defense. You can't do that, so you bring him in as the head coach. And I think there's definitely a learning curve here. I feel like he still has to become probably the global coach of the team. I think with Pete Carroll, and this became frustrating with people, he had a clear vision for how he was going to try to win the game. We knew what it was, and it actually any fan could identify what it was. And you either you criticized him for it after a while. Can we open it up offensively? Can we do this and that? But he had a clear vision for how to manage the whole team and win the game and how all these parts fit together, right? We can say the mantra of what it was that we're going to play this style of defense. We're going to run the ball. We're going to hit explosive plays in the pass game. It was his formula. And I think what we've seen here is, Mike McDonald surely has a formula for how he wants to call the game, and that hasn't been as good as hoped the last few weeks. But what's his vision for how all of this fits together? We're having games where, oh, that's on me. The OC says we forgot to run the ball. We didn't run the ball, right? Or now we come out this game and we're going to try to run the ball, but it's just a bunch of runs on first down. Uh, you know, that overall vision is the head coach's responsibility. So while I don't think he's going to be a finished product in the first 6 games, this is a nice chance to probably reset. He's got to take control of that and figure out how they're going to play complementary together to try to win the game. And I feel like we haven't felt that as much.
Do you think, Mike? I 100% agree with you. We're talking to Mike Sando from The Athletic, and I wonder a little bit how much of this, the way the season started, and then this particular schedule run contributes to that issue. So you go the first 3 games, you get some easy competition, you win all 3 of those games, you have what looks like one of the best defenses in the NFL through those games, even adjusting for opponent. And then you have you get your doors blown off on defense in Monday Night Football. You have a short week. You think, okay, we'll get things corrected. And then you have the Sunday night debacle, the Sunday debacle against the Giants. And then you have a short week to play the 49ers. So you have like this condensed period. So his ability to adjust and figure out how to, say, actually, here's the problem that we need to address and here's how we're going to adjust, came at him fast and then had a very short time to adjust to it.
And think of those are unusual challenges. So how many times, what's his long established plan for how the team travels on a short week, how they handle a short week coming off of a loss, how they handle this or that, right? Probably not well established as it would be for a super veteran coach. So I do think those 3 games in 11 days were a big challenge. And Detroit and San Francisco are 2 of the most physical teams that you're going to face. So you're going to find out who you are at the line of scrimmage. And obviously they were diminished too, unusually so, at a couple of points along the way. I think the game always reveals who you are, right? So what we know is that they're better than those teams that are bad. And they're not as good as these teams that are really good. And they're not good enough to just beat a okay middling team without playing well. That's the Giants. The Giants are probably a middling team. We thought of them as terrible, but I think they're probably a 6 or 7 win team, right? You'd say that. So that's not an automatic win for these guys. So that's why I think it's a great barometer this next game against Atlanta to just continue to find out who they are. If they go win the game and Indoor Gino has a big game, that's probably what should happen if you think if they are who you sort of thought that they were. But if they come off of this extra rest and go lose that game, you find out even more, right? And we got to figure that out and figure out how this coach manages the whole thing and the personalities and all of these things that have never been the job of the coordinator.
What's your impression? I mean, I assume you've been watching and listening at times to Mike McDonald in these press conferences. Not all of them, obviously. You cover national at this point, but what's your instinct telling you about how he's responding to this situation?
Well, I think he's done fine in those settings. I love the fact that he's able to explain what they're thinking, right? I mean, he can explain why they did something, and he does. He's pretty candid with their decision making during the game and that sort of a thing. So I think he's done fine there. I don't think there's anything we're looking at and seeing, oh my gosh, he's sinking, he's in way over his head. But he is the youngest head coach now, right? I think he's the youngest. He took over the youngest. So you get some of that. And then I think the bigger thing that we're figuring out, you alluded to this in your column, is just what he has to work with too as players, which he's figuring out, right? I mean, he's figuring out how all these guys fit together and who he can count on and how good they really are. And I think we're figuring that out too.
When you look at this game and you look at the situation with the team right now, one of the questions that comes to mind for me is, I think about Mike McDonald. I think about him, as you said, new situation as a head coach, does not have the depth of experience to draw upon about how to handle all these situations and how to handle leading the coaches and leading the players through all of this and handling the media, right?
Yeah.
But I then think, okay, so who's in his corner? Who does he have to like get in the corner with and work through this? Obviously, Leslie Frazier's a guy that's there for that reason. But I think in the past, Pete Carroll and John Schneider had each other as partners. Even though technically Pete
Hmm.
Carroll was above hierarchically, they were clearly partners. Is John Schneider in the foxhole with Mike McDonald in this case? Or is he looking at him and saying, you better get this fixed?
Oh, I think he'd definitely be in the foxhole with him. I mean, he hired him. He's super invested in him succeeding. But that's a huge difference in what the job of the GM is because Pete Carroll brings his program. Pete Carroll tells John Schneider and coaches him up on how we do this. Pete Carroll's been through all of the tough times in his life and took a year off and wrote a book and could speak for to any Fortune 500 company and have you coming out of your chair, right? He has an absolute finished product presentation of how to lead. Expert leader, master coach. There's not anybody better. So there's not a lot of counseling of Pete, right?
Mm-hmm.
Internally, they're probably looking at Pete going, geez, why is he doesn't seem uptight. He's got this, right? So now there's no way that's the case. And that's true for a lot of buildings, but there's no way you're going to the opposite extreme of that. So you know, I don't know how much during the season the GM is coaching up the coach on some of these things, but it definitely has to be a partner and be meeting and talking about these things. I think that was probably one of the things that appealed to hiring a Mike McDonald for somebody like John Schneider is you're involved in a different way, right? You're probably more directly talking to him about how things are going to be approached and and having more of a voice or a partnership in that. Where I think Pete's just got his thing and he's doing it a certain way, and no one's really telling him to do it a different way, and nor should they.
If the problem, however, is personnel and not
Hmm.
not the
Yeah.
coaching, then how does that get resolved in this kind of situation? How does Mike McDonald tell John Schneider, hey, look, you got me a couple of 1 year stopgaps at the linebacker position, and they are not doing it, and we don't have anyone else. And you gave us Laken Tomlinson at left guard, and you didn't really do much else to address the interior offensive line, and it's not working. Like, how does that conversation go?
I would not think that's a conversation that would be happening in week 6. Now, maybe at the
Mm,
mini bye week, you assess where you're at, but I think those would be more the conversations you need to have when you're, when you're assessing the season and deciding what needs to happen personnel wise in the off season. I would think they're going to know the film's not going to overly lie here, right, as to what they're doing. And if the personnel people think that, hey, actually we're not using this guy right, or that sort of a thing, I think that'll be a easy conversation for them to have. I think they'll be very candid with each other about that. And then, John Schneider, like you said, has the personnel say more now. He has it. So the direction they head after the season, he's going to control that more, but he's not going to, I can't imagine he's going to do something that Mike McDonald's not, that Mike McDonald would be against, especially for his defense, right? I think that will resolve itself in that way, but those will be honest conversations that probably have to be had uh, more towards the end of the year when it's assessment time in a big picture manner.
that makes a lot of sense, Mike. I guess the exception to that would be if you think that you need to make a move or this thing is
Hmm.
going to continue to spiral, like there's not a coaching path to to stopping the leaks
Hmm.
in the
Yeah.
dam, then trade deadline's coming up, right? Few weeks. I don't, I talked about it. I don't know that there's any trade that's going to like solve the problems here. But do you think that the pressure may increase, to have that conversation with the way things are looking right now?
Well, if there's an obvious glaring thing, then that's it's known, right? I mean, obviously, they'd be talking about that now. I'm talking more about global, big picture of
Hmm.
we need to overhaul this whole thing, or this isn't working. But certainly, they know what their weaknesses are. I would imagine there's not a big disagreement over where there's a trouble spot. By the end of the year, though, they would be able to know, hey, this guy is difficult to coach, or right, these types of things, or I don't this isn't working for whatever reason. In the short term, definitely. If you have a glaring problem at a position and there's somebody available, uh, you go and consider to do it. And I don't think that's a big challenge, but the hard part is there's just not a lot of great players available, and you're probably not going to mortgage your future for some guy who's available. I
Hmm.
wouldn't think.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like they're just a guy away or something like that.
Yeah,
But I think one of the one of the issues here with this team is Mike McDonald was brought in as a defensive coach, and even if there are personnel flaws, the expectation is that a defensive coach can find a way to at least put a credible defense on the field. And over the
yeah,
last 3 games, you can't call what they've put out there a credible defense. And you can point to injuries, you can point to all sorts of things, but that's just not how the NFL works. No one really gives you those excuses. And so
yeah,
when you've got a situation where you can't really, like, the things that you are known for are not the things that are going well, and the things that you're not known for are also not going well,
yeah.
and it's going to get just harder, not necessarily easier. Where do you go? How do you stop the spin? It's a hard job.
It is. I mean, you hope, I guess, some of the things even out that they haven't been able to do. They can't make a play on defense. That's one of the things I tweeted last night was like, can they ever make it easy on give themselves a short field? They've got two short fields the whole year on offense where they started on plus territory. So I don't know how you turn it around. Now, you don't play Detroit and San Francisco. So a lot of the NFL and how you feel about yourself is based on who you play. And usually that'll even out, over the course of the season. But I'm looking right now through 6 games on offense, they're averaging 21.7 points per game. That's exactly what it was through 6 games last year. The defense allowing 23.3, meaning when the defense was on the field, that's up from 19.7. So, that's not exactly what you were looking to see. And it wasn't really what we were looking at for the first 3 games. So I think you have to account for I think the things you thought you liked about McDonald and how they were doing things on defense weren't all false in the first 3 games, and and all the fears are not all true after the last 3 games. Playing those two really good teams, the the scary thing, the bad thing was the Giant game to me. That now,
Hmm.
do you buy that? Did you buy the Chris Long tweet about you play Detroit and you feel it the next week? Remember, Seattle used to be that team. 10 years ago there was a thing like, hey, these teams after they played Seattle, they really were flat. And so if you look at Detroit, Arizona played kind of a tough game against Detroit and then got blown out, right, 40 something to whatever. Um, I can't remember if that happened to the Rams, but it certainly happened to
It
the
happened to
Seahawks. Had
every
a bad
team that
game.
it
Yeah,
has.
happened every game. So
And yeah.
I don't know if I 100% buy that, but I do think that there's a drained team component of some of this in the last few games.
The Giants game is absolutely the one that is really hard to, like, there's no excuse for it. And the piece that I would throw out there that came from Bob Condata, who did some research on this, that in those road Monday night games and then home Sunday games, in Pete's tenure over 14 years, there was only one time where they won both of those. And that was a time where they won on the road in St. Louis. They barely beat the Rams 14-9 with a last second stand at the goal line against like Austin Davis or whoever it was.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they came home and they fell behind 20 or 23 nothing to the winless Tampa Bay Bucks, but managed to come back and win that game. If you look at all those games, those Monday away and Sunday home end up being a very brutal um, back to
Yeah.
back that I wouldn't have otherwise expected to be as hard as it seems like it is.
I think I remember that Tampa Bay game. Didn't Russell Wilson just get smashed in his knees really hard down in the red zone, and when they were falling behind? Was that the? It was a Pete era game you were talking about, right?
Yeah, that
Yeah, I
was
remember that.
2013. That was the Super
Yeah,
Bowl year.
I do remember that game. I think I remember that game, and then yeah, they came back to win. So there is something to that. I think there is something like we just talked about. You're playing good teams, short weeks, weird stuff, and they didn't look good. And when you're coming out and falling behind by 20 or being punchless against the Giants, I mean, it has to be some of that. It has to be some of that. So that's why I think it's a nightmare, like you said. It's a nightmare 3 game stretch, and a huge barometer is going to be Atlanta because that's a mid team. You've had extra time now. Let's see why you hired Mike McDonald. Does he have some really good scheme here that's going to help elevate him? Because I don't feel like we felt that. Maybe he's short on the horses or whatever. But I keep looking for these last few games of like where did they outflank? You
Hmm.
know, defensively. And then offensively, when they do outflank, like I thought they had a great third down call yesterday on that middle screen. Fred Warner just beats this guy and makes a tackle, the better player thing, which you wrote about today too, the better
Yeah.
player, on the other team thing. So I would love to see, like, we need to see some evidence of that after this time off, that there's answers that, hey, Seattle had the extra time, and that's a difficult thing to play McDonald when he's got time to prepare, right? That needs to happen. I feel like that needs to happen this week.
It does. It does. And it's amazing. It's always amazing how the narratives just get written, and you don't have a choice in who you play or what the schedule is.
Hmm.
If this had been if you'd mix this game, the schedule up, and the results had happened in a different way,
Yeah.
it would feel different right now. But it is
Yeah.
absolutely feeling like a spiral. And to your point, it has not felt like there's been a scheme advantage yet or a coaching advantage yet in these games. And that, I think, is where the biggest concern is. Like, there should be something that the Seahawks do coming into a game where opponents are having to adjust. And we're just seeing very little of that. How much of that's coaching? How much of that is the players? You know,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, it's and coaching is partly about scheme, but it's not mostly about scheme. And so we've heard on the broadcasts, right? Troy Aikman or these guys, hey, if Mike McDonald can get these guys into third and long, that's going to be where he can really turn it loose. Well, everybody's good when the opponent is in third and long, right? I mean, there's no one in the league, there's no offense in the league that just consistently in third and long is awesome. So they've got to do it other times too, except for that, right? When they can get
Yeah.
those blitz packages
Well,
going, you've got to
I
have
mean,
some sort of a thing.
it's funny, Mike. I like nobody will want to hear this, and I get that nobody will want to hear this, but there was actually progress in run defense yesterday. Like,
Yeah. 2 plays, right? You're going to 2 plays for 1,000 yards on 2 plays. So I know exactly what you're talking
like
about.
and like there's no I'm not gonna like
Yeah.
defend it, but if I'm looking at it
Yeah.
from a play by play basis, they did a
Yeah.
better job defending the run in that game than they did in the previous two. But if you look at the collective, like overall, it's not, and so it is tough. One of the things I wanted to ask you about before we get you out of here is I'm curious. You're such an objective national view.
Hmm.
I was not impressed with that 49er team yesterday. Yes, they won. Yes, they
Yeah.
won by convince. I felt like that team, like even the players that were on the field, feel like lesser versions of what they've been, other than maybe Debo. Um, what was your impression watching
I
that in a
agree.
must-win game?
I feel like they are less in control of their games. And I feel like at, at their best, they've been a team that kind of puts their foot on your throat a little bit and just presses it a little bit harder as the game goes on. And then every once in a while, Mahomes wriggles out of there and has the comeback. They've lost some fourth quarter leads, but I felt like they've been in control this season. I've watched a lot of them. It feels like it's a lot of Brock Purdy running around trying to make something happen, and it's not as much. It doesn't feel as sustainable. It doesn't feel as automatic. It feels like you could blow a 10-point lead a couple times, late in the game. And then special teams wise, I mean, they've had major meltdowns. I mean, their Ram game when they lost a 10-point lead, they gave up a huge punt return to somebody, to like a free agent, like a rookie free agent type guy, to give Stafford the field position to win the game. And then they're coasting in this one and they give up a kickoff return touchdown. So I do, and that their kickers hurt, right? Too. So I feel like they're not. I agree with you. I feel like they're not the same team, and I don't feel like Kittle's as good. I know he caught a couple touchdowns. I just haven't felt that as well as much. And Ayuk hasn't been himself. Maybe they get it together by the end of the year, but I
Sure.
was worried for them that they would be able to keep all those guys healthy for the whole year. That's been assumed, but we've already seen McCaffrey's not there, and I think it makes a big difference, especially in the red zone for them.
It certainly does. And I guess I just having seen the Lions up front and seeing the 49ers, I think there's a gap between those two teams. I think the Lions are
Yeah.
much more well-rounded and they feel more ascending, and the 49ers feel like they're holding on. It does not feel like
Yeah.
the same team. Um,
I'm with you. Yeah.
One last thing, DK Metcalf.
Yeah.
This is, I think, arguably the most gifted athlete on the Seahawks roster. The guy that probably, from an athletic profile perspective, has the highest ceiling of any player on the roster. And Charvarius Ward wasn't even playing in this game. It felt like to me there's an opportunity for him to make plays in this game. People were on Gino for underthrowing a ball to him deep. He had Nick Bosa barreling down into him. I didn't see DK Metcalf make any adjustment and try to go back to that ball. You saw George Kittle get 2 feet down on a tough play. DK Metcalf couldn't quite do it at the end of the half. Like,
Yeah. He
is
had a
this
couple big fumbles too
he had a
this
couple
year,
big
obviously.
critical fumbles the last couple weeks, and his route contributed to the final interception. I don't know if you've seen the film on that,
Oh,
but
yeah.
so
Details, right? Details.
details. So what do you make of DK Metcalf, knowing that this is a decision
Yeah.
you're going to have to make from a contract
Yeah.
perspective? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a discussion to have. It's not automatic to do it. He is obviously a very talented and emotional player.
Mm-hmm.
The two fumbles were not him being, doing something, holding the ball way out or lateraling, doing some crazy play. He's fighting for extra yards and got stripped of the ball. So I live with those a little bit, knowing that you got to coach him on it and all of that. But I think those are errors of effort. Good effort, right? That's not him being lackadaisical, in my opinion. Um, he does get frustrated with and get drawn into these matchups sometimes, though, in a way that has hurt him and the team. We certainly saw it in the Ram playoff game a couple years ago. There's a pick six that was, kind of on him, right? A little bit, if I remember right. That was correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
Remember that play? And then this one here at the end looked that way to me too. So I don't know that's gonna change. I think you're gonna live with those components, the great playmaking, but the up and down emotionally, probably during the game, um, and a little bit of a lack of consistency. And I don't know if that last play, if he's frustrated in the game, didn't it feel late in the game like a couple plays they made a concerted effort to like they're they threw him a couple super easy short passes. It was almost like we got to get DK a couple here. We got to keep him going in this thing, and that is a management thing that goes on with not just him among wide receivers in the league, but it is frustrating. And then on the last that play down the middle where it looks like he doesn't run his route, I mean that costs you a chance. It felt like they were going to have a chance. I know you're
Mm-hmm.
backed up, but they had already gone 90 some yards for a touch
Mm-hmm.
for 90 earlier, so. I think you're going to live with that component of it. I don't necessarily see those. I think you're going to take the good with the bad.
It is a lesser discussed part of NFL management and teams. When you got a player, DK Metcalf also does not seem like necessarily the most self-aware or coachable player,
Hmm.
and there's been some evidence of that. And you saw even Geno Smith still falling on the sword post game. It's on me. but he knows he has to say that because I think he knows that if he says anything else, his receiver's gonna like go in the tank. And so you've got all these really high priced receivers who across the NFL, you've got some personality issues. I got to tell you, Mike, I have qualms about the amount of money you have to dedicate to that position and how much you have to rely on them if they're not the guys that are like an Amon-Ra St. Brown that are just dogs that when the game is on the line, they stand up, they don't shrink. And I think that DK Metcalf has not
Yeah.
earned that reputation yet.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of that last night after the game. I was thinking, I was exactly like, what would Gino's body language be at walking off the field after that interception, or what would he say after the game? Right? It's hard. It's got to be really hard. But and even Mike McDonald didn't say anything, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that I remembered when I watched his press conference, at least.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I was actually thinking of that, like, what direction would I go? And you're a first year coach here, so you're going to be making some statements at the end of the year about who are your guys, too. Who are the
Mm-hmm.
guys we're going to win with? Who are we going to count on? Tyler Lockett's been that guy, but he's not going to be there forever, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
JSN's going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it's an interesting consideration of like, there's a lot of football left to be played, and DK Metcalf's going to inform this conversation, but you'd be thinking in the back of your mind at least about alternatives or what could happen in the draft or how you want to configure it, how you see it being configured for the long term. I'm with you. It's not automatic.
Mike, thank you so much for coming on as usual every Friday. That's Mike Sando from The Athletic. You can follow him on Twitter at Sando NFL. Mike, have a great rest of your Friday.
Hey, get some rest, will you?
I'm heading to the VMAC to go talk to Mike McDonald. So I'll do that.
Okay.
I'll got another
All right.
show at 11 and then I'll hopefully get some rest. But I appreciate
Okay.
it.
I'm
My
going to
friend.
watch that too. Thanks. Love it.
All
See
right.
you.
Thank you. Everybody, that is Mike McDonald. And as I said, I will be back on here in a little while as we get Evan Hill and and Jeff Simmons on. If you haven't already, now is a great time to head over to ftnfantasy.com. Use promo code HBAM to get access to 15% off. It's great. You will be happy that you did it. And let's all pay attention to what Mike McDonald says here in a little bit. I will be back with you soon. I appreciate it. I know there are some folks that had super chats. I can't get to those right now. I will be back at 11. We'll do some more then. Hope to see you then. Take care, everybody.